Mike Leone, host of the Can We Please Talk podcast and director of strategy for the Free and Equal Elections Foundation, Nayyera Haq, former Obama White House senior director, and Matt Gorman, Republican strategist and former senior advisor to the Tim Scott presidential campaign. Just laying it out there, everyone thinking about the divvying up and how this would change and how it works. Michael, let me begin with you, because the idea of changing the rules now in a winner-take-all system, that to me strikes me as a time you would do long before the 40-something days before an election. What does it tell you that it's happening now?
Well, first off, I come from a state where this has all happened before, right? The 537 Votes documentary on HBO Max that people can go watch about all of the Florida issues that we had back in 2000. So nobody knows how to mess up a little bit of vote counting than Florida, right? So, but what it says to me is that the Republican Party, specifically Donald Trump, he has said this in press conferences, the one in Bedminster, he got asked about credit card debt, and he started talking about we should make paper ballots, one-day voting. He was very specific about that. This message is trickling from the top down. The problem is that administratively, like you just mentioned and Milton just mentioned, it's not feasible. If you want this all to work in one day, it's not going to happen. And it's seriously an analogy for other problems that are happening, like immigration at the border is an administrative issue. If you don't have enough people, resources in place, and there's too many people at the system, you're not going to be able to process everybody. So how are we supposed to do all of this? How are you actually taking this serious and having it in a one-day format when you're complicating matters? And to complicate it all, you heard Brad Raffensperger say, this is probably illegal. The subject matter experts are saying it's probably illegal.
To your point about how this is part of a connected worldview, the worldview is undermining trust in systems, right? Administrative process is the enemy. And trust Donald Trump and what he wants done, and specifically what he wants done are older, archaic systems, including, undermining any trust and massive lawsuit for Fox News as a result of undermining trust in digital voting systems. We have seen consistently, though, that the Trump campaign has been setting up processes in multiple states, mostly states where there is a significant minority population. Arizona, just last week, the Republican Party decided to challenge 100,000 voting records of people who, actually many of them are older Republican, reliable voters. So the idea of restricting who, when, and how you can vote is something that Donald Trump and the Republican Party specifically makes part of their process.
The biggest concern here, I think, is length. Figuring out when people have voted in your state. If you're still figuring this out a week or 2 weeks after election day, that's a problem. I mean, you talk about Florida. I think Florida's a shining example because after 2000, my old boss, Jeb Bush, reformed the laws down there, and 93% of votes in Georgia Republican reported in 2020 by 9:30 that night. Look at Pennsylvania, for instance, only 75% by 9 a.m. the next morning. So take away Georgia for a second. States reporting taking too long to report their results also casts a little bit of a pall. You see, California takes sometimes 2 weeks to get their full results in. That's unacceptable. You need to be able to do it. First of all, you need to start counting votes before Election Day, ones that have already been submitted, just like Florida does. And then you need to have them out rapidly once the polls close. That also helps restore trust, not taking 2 weeks to just as votes come in.
I mean, the longer you have people thinking, wait, I wonder who it is, and the more the other state numbers come in, the more you're going to have this trajectory of, well, where is it going? People are going to naturally think that you're trying to put your thumb on the scale, which makes me just wonder, we heard just a few weeks ago, and for days ago, and probably hours ago, where Trump has said, listen, Democrats are putting their thumb on the scale by taking Biden out of the race entirely, and they're trying to switch things up in the middle of the game. Isn't this the middle of the game, switching up the rules? Wouldn't that be the same critique?
Well, those critiques that other people, right, they only belong to other people, not to Donald Trump in that universe. Like the consistency of criticism that he launches about, oh, well, they're the ones doing divisive rhetoric. They're the ones who are undermining democracy. But meanwhile, he's the guy who called up a Georgia state official and said, find me a couple of thousand more votes so I can win your state.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, and the larger part of this conversation is that there's no uniformity, right, from a federal perspective. Like, it's every state, and to Matt's point, I want to go back to Florida for a second. Yes, the laws under Jeb Bush have been reformed. I think Florida does it the best in terms of the way the mail-in ballot process starts, like what Matt was mentioning before in terms of counting early, and then what they do on Election Day. But to what Milton was saying before, undermining these systems, these are people that in some states are volunteering their time. right? And so to be able, and I know in Georgia he just said that they were paid for this, but like, it's a stipend, right? Like these people are putting democracy ahead of everything in their country.
These are neighbors, right?
Right,
These are the
right.
seniors in the community who've been there for 30, 40 years.
And they're critical.
Yes.
Right.
Our system cannot work unless
without
they're
them.
actually doing it.
Right.
And this is part of what the intention was, to have these be locally connected systems where people recognize each other, right? Help build community trust. This is why you use public facilities. And all of that has now had this pall put on it that not only will we not know, but you cannot trust these local officials who are literally your neighbors. But beyond that, it creates this window of opportunity for phone calls, lawsuits, anything to be said. And it's not just Trump denying or saying he will not certify the election. There's been a consistent presence on national television of Republican elected officials saying, well, we'll see. It really depends. I don't know about certifying the election. They have been explicitly asked. 50 states all say what the vote is. Would you certify? I mean, I got to see what happens.
I mean, I have monitored a number of elections, and I think to myself about the individuals who were doing it. And I think back to what happened last time when you had a mother-daughter passing a piece of ginger candy in the accusations. You can imagine people counting by hand and then being asked about it. But people are going to have a huge influx of voters because of what is kind of on the ballot in invisible ink or not. And one thing that the Harris campaign was doing in Georgia today was focusing on the why people are turning out. She was focusing on, after this ProPublica report, that described 2 women in Georgia dying after taking abortion pills and suffering from complications. Now, the state medical experts, they actually say that their deaths were preventable, and their families blame Georgia's 6-week abortion ban. Harris addressed that in Georgia today.
And these hypocrites want to start talking about this is in the best interest of women and children. Well, where you been? Where you been when it comes to taking care of the women and children of America? Where you been? How dare they? How dare they? Come on.
Look, polls in Georgia show a very tight race. And so, when you think about this, Matt, given that, could abortion be a deciding factor among all these things?
It could be a major factor. I mean, look, Brian Kemp won after instituting the 6-week ban pretty handily. So there's a pathway to win there, but you actually have to put together a kind of a message in a campaign, one that we haven't seen as of yet from the Trump campaign. Now, I'm not saying you go and you fight on the abortion ground, but you need to provide the economic message, the immigration message. And look, the Trump messaging right now, at least in the last 10 days, especially since the debate, it's been pretty scattershot. You need to provide essentially messaging counter-programming to this. It can be done, as Brian Kemp showed, but you need to be able to do it, and you can't just try to fight in their turn.
It's also much harder to do that counter-programming when the impact of the laws are now taking place, right? And that's part of what we're seeing is it's gotten to the point where there are lawsuits, there are hospital records showing, and with these 2 women, it was considered medical negligence. That to get to medical negligence is a pretty high standard. Forget about all of the anecdotal stories that we are hearing about the reality of what it was like in the 1950s and 60s. Women will have abortions. But if they can use medical advancements to have healthier families, healthier bodies, that is the part of denying women that, denying families that opportunity, I think is what has woken up this anger in what potentially will be swing voters.
And just real quick to her point, in my state in Florida, the 6-week abortion ban is on the ballot here. 75% of voters, when that came out at the end of April and Governor DeSantis signed into law and went into effect in May, said that they did not want the state constitution to have that 6-week abortion ban. So this is impacting people in my community and stuff like that. This is a major issue. I think Democrats are positioning this right, put it back the onus on the person who says that he caused all of this, right, in terms of the way he hired these Supreme Court justices, et cetera. So smart of them to do that.
Well, we'll see. We don't know of any medical or charges against any officials in the state over these 2 deaths, but certainly this is continuing to be a topic of conversation in Georgia and all across the country. Stand by, everyone, please. Tonight, a new excuse enters the conversation. Forget the dog ate my homework or I was hacked. Now it's blame it on the AI. Up next, a closer look at the rise of that political excuse. Plus, Donald Trump gets ready to campaign in North Carolina. So what's exactly his strategy to try to deal with the Mark Robinson scandal? The panel tackles that next.